Hello and welcome back to DriveDriverDriven. I'm Humble and today we're working on the MK project, or I should say parts of it. The kit itself should be making an appearance any day now, either on the MK Sports channel or here in my garage. I know that the kit has arrived at the factory. The yellow powder coat looks amazing. At least on video or in pictures, it looks like it's a killer match for wheels down over here. Parts are coming together and getting put in the crate as we speak. So in the upcoming weeks, that's going to be ready to ship. So it's important that we get some of the little stuff knocked out before it arrives. At least that's what I'd like to do, because when the kit gets here, I want to be able to throw all the parts on it in literally just a couple of weeks to get a roller that we can wheel around. And the only way to do that is to pre-build some of the stuff before it gets here. So case in point, what we're looking at is a set of K-miata hubs that, well, prior to this, I've refinished. So I cleaned these up, refurbished them, got them nice and painted, so they are ready to go. And then I purchased a set of Miata Motorsports hub from Flying Miata. Now I know these are complete overkill for the car that we're putting them on, but these are upgrades for built or blueprinted Miata hubs, typically used in racing series, etc. But even built and blueprinted hubs have been known to fail with extended race duty, and that's just because of the cornering loads that Miata's put them through. Now, in our application, we're slapping these on a car that weighs over 1,000 pounds less than a spec Miata. I don't think even stock hubs would have really been an issue, but if it's worth building, it's worth overbuilding. So we're going with these Mazda Motorsport hubs, and really what makes them different is they run a larger tapered bearing inside the hub. They use a very premium Japanese bearing, both on the inner and outer. As you can see, the races are already installed in the billet hub. The billet hub comes with extended wheel studs already pressed in and ready to go. There's a handful of other parts here which are sort of put into place as we build up the hub. So we have a rear seat and seal. Here's the seal itself. A couple of spacers that will go on the spindle. Our new wheel nut, or I should say our new axle nut. And then an O-ring seal for the front dust cover and the front dust cover itself. We don't need yet another video of how to pack bearings, so if you're curious on how to do that, just look it up on Google or YouTube. It's easy enough to just do by yourself with your bare hands or with gloves or whatever. I use simple moly grease. You don't have to go crazy. It doesn't have to be a super special motorsport only thing. Just simple moly grease will do. Again, this is already overkill. We don't need to spend $100 on special grease when just basic moly grease will fit the bill. And so now what we have to do is put all of this together. To assemble, it's actually really easy. They do a good job of laying everything out with a colored set of instructions, step-by-step instructions on how to put the hub together, but there's one step that is briefly mentioned and is easy to miss because there isn't actually a picture of it in the instructions. So first off, what we want to do is we're going to drop our rear bearing, or the backside bearing I should say, into our hub here, and that's what I've got this pick for. Everything's nice and greased up. We can just drop that guy in and it finds its way home. Next up, what we need to do is we have to press this seal in place, but what I'm going to do really quick is just clean the grease off the edge there. This green seal is what you put in place on the back of the hub. It just presses in. So here's our bearing press and our handy bearing press seat tool. And that's all you need to do to drive it home. Is you just want to make sure the seal is nice and flat with the back lip here. And then take a little bit of grease with your finger, just borrow it from the bearing, and we're going to grease the inside of the seal here, because this surface needs to have a little bit of lube where it will seat against the new bearing seat seal, whatever you want to call it, which is this guy here, which has its own O-ring. And the way this works is we have a little kind of divot here on the back of the spindle. We have the same kind of matching divot here, if you can see that. And this O-ring goes between the two, just loosely, just like so. And that keeps kind of a nice firm fit, a nice seal on everything. So to assemble all this, what we're going to do is we're going to take our rear seat and just press it into place. Just with your fingertips, that's it. It just sits in there, and that seals up against that greased seal that we just did. And we're going to take a little more grease here, just borrow it. We're going to grease that little O-ring seat. And the reason we do that is it helps get this O-ring to stay on that new rear seat while we drop that onto the spindle. So now that that's in place, we will just turn this over and we will drop this whole assembly down onto the spindle. All right, from here, we have our two spacers. So this is the bearing race spacer or whatever. This goes on the thick part of our spindle. Just drop that down. And then this is the smaller bearing, and there's a little taper inside here, and there's a matching taper that it sits on the spindle. And this is to get basically extend the fatter part of that spindle up a little bit so that the new bearing has a proper seat up top. So when we install this, we install it with this taper facing down and this flat edge facing up. And then just pop that home. And now we're going to take our bearing and just pop this guy in and send that home. Last but not least, we're going to take our spindle nut and pop that on. Now I'm going to take this whole assembly here, and we have to put this in the vise since we don't have a car to put this on. And we need to tighten that spindle nut down to 125 foot-pounds. And now that that's tight, we need to stake the spindle nut. So what that means is there's a little gap here, and we're going to use this chisel to just drive a V-wedge down into that gap, and that prevents the spindle nut from loosening on us. There, and just like this, if I can get in there, you want to make sure there's a nice positive engagement in there. And with that done, now we can put our dust cover on. So for our dust cover, we have the larger of the O-rings in the kit, and that just sits down here in the groove. And then the dust cover itself only fits one way. It's got a little recess that it sits in. And this is an optional step, but because I plan on abusing this car, I'm just adding a drop of blue Loctite, and that's just to make sure that these don't vibrate loose. Not that I expect them to. These might be covered by the brake disc once it goes on, and we'll get to that for the second part of this video. But for now, we just want to add a drop of blue Loctite to each of these and then start screwing them in, just finger tight initially. And then once those are finger tight, just start finishing the job with kind of a star pattern as you go around. And we're just cinching these up till they're snug. And then we're just going to do one final pass to tighten them. These aren't actually holding the wheel on. You don't have to torque the bejesus out of them. Just nice and snug. And there we go. All right, now I got a couple of tips while we're here that just little garage tips is all. First tip is, because we had this nice painted spindle, if I grab the camera, and you can see, yeah, it's just a little nicked here. It's not perfect, and I don't know if that will or will not be seen once it's on the car. Well, this is just a black paint pen, and we're just gonna touch it up. When you dab like that, it just applies a little more paint. You use the felt tip, basically spread it around, and now it's good as new. Ditto for the back side. Just had it bite in there, and then a little down here. Job done. Nice and easy. That works for basically most of the base colors. So if you're working with like a base or standard yellow, red, blue, green, black, white, etc., you'll find a paint pen in a close enough paint that a little touch up like that will work just about perfectly, and you can't even tell where it was nicked. Second tip I have is these little cups that were used to keep the bearings in place when these hubs shipped. Whenever you get stuff like this, hold on to it because you never know when this will come in handy, whether it's to cup this if you rebuild it later, to plug or cap something of a similar size. I don't know how much these cost individually, but I have just a number of these caps that I've gotten with hoses for AN fittings on motors, whatever, over the years, and I can't tell you how invaluable these things are when you're actually taking a motor out of a car, going through a transmission or whatever, and you need to plug a line. So worth holding on to. Now on to the second bit. So you can see I've already got one setup done here with the new caliper, rotor hat, rotor, the whole assembly pre-done. Again, goes together super easy, and I'm gonna take you through the steps now and give you a couple of tips when you're building a big brake kit like this. Obviously, step one is to read the directions, go through the instructions, read and understand these fully. But what I also like to do is, with nicer kits like Willwood and others, you'll get an exploded diagram that shows all of the parts. It'll have call-out numbers with regards to which part it is. So if you have multiple bolts, you can figure out which bolt is which. And then what I like to do is go through the instructions, and for each of the bolts or any fastener that you need to tighten is to write the torque spec for that bolt right here on the exploded diagram. So you only need to refer to one sheet. And it just makes it quick and easy, readable access for the instructions while putting everything together. Now, I've already done a little bit of pre-assembly because you don't need to watch me install the rotor hat, but the Willwood rotor hat just uses 6 Torx button head bolts that go in through the disc to hold everything in place. This is a static mount. This is not a floating mount. So the disc and the rotor hat do not move in relation to each other. Everything is just snug down tight, and all the bolts get tightened down to 25 foot-pounds. Now from here, you can see that I've got our kind of knuckle assembly in the vise. If I tilt the camera up, make it a little bit easier. So from here, there is a spacer that needs to go on, and what this does is this positively locates the hat, and it makes sure that the hat and the full assembly go onto our hub assembly properly, and that everything is sitting at the right distance front to back. So we'll just pop this ring into place, and then we pop the hat into place on our hub assembly. And then that makes sure that everything's, you know, nice and tight, etc. You can use a couple of nuts or whatever to cinch everything down if you need, but I haven't found that it's necessary. Again, this job is easier to do on the car, but since we don't have the rest of the car yet, we're just going to use the vise to hold everything in place. Now, again, something else I like to do when I'm going through the instructions is to put all the bolts in place in the orientation they need to go, including things like our washers, our spacers, and then our initial fitment washers. And this is to set the depth of the caliper against the rotor. We'll get to that in a second. But you pre-lay everything out on the bracket so that everything's at hand. It's easy to see and easy to reach. That being said, we're going to start by removing the bolts necessary to mount the bracket to our knuckle. And these include a little spacer and then the bolt itself. And the spacer needs to go between the knuckle and the bracket, which in our case is on the inside, which is a little hard to manage without getting in the way of the camera, so bear with me. And then we'll do the other one. Now, to make this next part easier, what we want to do is just get these cinched up. They don't have to be super tight, but the idea is we need to apply red Loctite to the bolts that go into the bracket, and that is actually easier to do one at a time with these bolts nipped up. And so now that this bracket's kind of held nice and tight, we can pull this bolt out and we can apply our red Loctite. And you don't have to drown it, just a little bit is fine. And since there's tension holding that bracket in place, we don't have to worry about losing the spacer. And then we can cinch this one up. We don't want to go to full torque just yet. We just want to cinch it up so that we can hold the bracket in place while we do the other side. Pull this guy out. Oh, a little bit of Loctite. And then right back home. We need to torque these to 30 foot-pounds. There we go. All set, nice and easy. Now it's time for our caliper. Nice set of stickers. We got our caliper here. And now I'm really glad that I painted our knuckles black because these calipers just match. And we can pull off our warning label, but we'll leave the rubber band and clip in here for the moment. Now, the one thing about the Wilwood calipers is you'll notice they have bleeders on either side. So it doesn't matter what orientation you put the caliper in. Whenever you do bleed these, you'll bleed the outside first and then the inside as part of your bleeding procedure. And we'll get to that down the line once these are on the car and we're bleeding the brakes. But because they put bleeders on all four corners, it makes installing these really easy. You don't have to worry about them being sighted. Now, the orientation of our bolts here is such that we need to get the bolt through the caliper, and then we need to get our 3 spacing washers through just like this. And we need to carefully hold it in place while we put it on the knuckle. And likewise for the other side, just swing the caliper out and then carefully swing it into position without losing those washers. And as before, we'll cinch it up. Now, if we zoom in here a little bit, you can see that there's a split in the caliper on either side because this is a 2-piece caliper. And you'll notice that that split isn't centered. And in fact, while I put the 3 washers in there, it looks like the caliper is too far this way, which means I can pull out one of those washers on either side, which will move it forward or up this way. And that's different from the other side. So even though the instructions may have a a suggestion as to how many of those spacing washers you put in. It will differ, or it may differ on your car. So what you'll want to do is just try it, cinch it up, check to see that it's centered, and then add or remove washers to suit until it is in fact running center to the caliper. All right, and now with a quick correction, you can see that that split now is back in the middle where it belongs on either side. Now, a quick note, as you pull washers out from one side or the other, you want to make sure that they have the same amount left and right, because if the caliper sits cockeyed, you'll have strange wear patterns or strange brake behaviors. So you want to make sure that you run the same amount of washers left and right, or up and down, however your orientation, but the same amount of washers on each bolt, so that it's as even as possible across the face of the caliper and the rotor. And so now that that's done, we're going to do the same trick to add Loctite and cinch those bolts up to 40 foot-pounds. And then from there we can move to adding our brake pads. And that's that. So now we can install our brake pads. So what's nice about these is they have a quick release pin, so you can do quick pad changes at track. The one downside is that it does use a cotter pin and not any kind of like a friction clip or something like that. There are alternatives that you can use instead of one of these. But for now, we're just going to go with the split clip and drop our pads in. And these are just the supplied pads from Wilwood for this kit. And they just drop right in. And then we'll put our split pin in. And we're not really ready to set this yet, but just bend these out a little bit, which will keep the clip itself or the pin itself from falling out while we're manipulating the knuckles. But for now, that's it. That is a brake setup complete. All right, there you have it. So a little bit more information about this kit. This is the Little Big Brake Kit from Flying Miata. Everything you see here with the, well, I should say the discs, the calipers, the rotor hats, those are all a part of the Little Big Brake Kit. Again, I chose the Mazda Motorsports hubs to make sure that we have a completely bulletproof assembly. I am not expecting any issues whatsoever with this setup. And as I've explained in prior videos, this sort of addresses the problem of having specialist parts that are hard to find. Well, none of this is hard to find. In fact, Flying Miata has had a various amount of brake kits for Miatas available for years. And Wilwood is a well-known company, and they supply all of these parts individually, the calipers, the rotor hats, and the rotors. So when it comes time to replace friction surface, or when it comes time to replace any other component, whether it's the rotor hat or the caliper due to damage, I can source all of those parts readily and easily from Wilwood. So I'm really, really happy that should anything happen, or if I need any parts of the track, chances are I can find someone with spares, or even get spares myself fairly easily. So that's going to do it for today. A quick little project to get the brakes kind of pre-set up. And I did see that the video dropped today's Sunday, from MK Sports, showing the chassis in the workshop. If you haven't seen that yet, go give it a watch. You can see it on the MK Sportscars Workshop walkthrough, and I'll leave a link down in the description below. But that yellow chassis is destined for this garage in the coming weeks. So keep an eye out, keep your fingers crossed, and we'll get it here sooner than later. So that being said, I think that's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.